Now my next guest is Cinzia de Santis. She was a biologist and now full-time writer. Before moving to Milton under Wychwood, she lived most of her life in Venezuela, where she also spent her teenage years performing as an actor on the amateur and professional circuits. Her debut novel in English is called The Sense of Darkness, and Cinzia joins me now. Lovely to see you. Welcome to the show, Cinzia.
Thank you, Kat.
Is there an English equivalent to Cinzia?
Yes, it's Cynthia.
Oh, yeah, not too very much far away from Cinzia, is it, Cynthia? So, what's it like? Can I call you Cynthia?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
What's it like growing up in such a breathtakingly beautiful country, but with a painful sting in its tail?
When I was growing up in Venezuela, the situation was not as dramatic as it is now. And growing up there means falling in love with the country. It's beautiful, it's stunningly beautiful. We have all sort of different environments, like from the snow in the Andes to the most spectacular coral reefs, archipelagos, the Amazon, the Orinoco Delta, the savannas. Wherever you turn around in Venezuela, you find this overwhelming beauty.
So you had a charmed childhood, really?
Yes.
What was your childhood like then? Tell me about your parents. Tell me about where you lived in Venezuela.
Well, I was born in Italy from Italian parents, and therefore that's the name. The name is actually an Italian name. It's Cinzia in Italian. But I moved to Venezuela when I was 3 months old. Therefore, my heart and my home is really Venezuela. I lived a little bit kind of sort of a ghetto because a lot of Italians moved to Venezuela when after the war, and they remained in some sort of capsule, an Italian capsule. But actually, it's really when I start studying biology and especially marine biology that I discovered the beauty and the powerful magic that this country has, you cannot get out of your system really.
What's changed, though? And clearly, a lot has changed. You said when you grew up in Venezuela, the picture wasn't as bad as it indeed is now. So what is happening? What really is the picture now in Venezuela?
The current picture in Venezuela is what I call a humanitarian crisis in slow motion. Last year, we had 25,000 people murdered, and 92% of those murders went unpunished. And I'm talking about a population of 30 million people. So we had more crimes, more murders than Europe and United States together in 1 year. Inflation is 56% last year, and this year is expected to be 70 or even 100%. Kidnap is common. Last week, for example, a friend of my daughter who is 20 years old was taken from her bed, kidnapped for ransom. And her father had been kidnapped 2 months ago. So it's not only the street crime, but it's also the kidnap, the blackmails. It's really sort of a war zone.
How does it make you feel? Because this is a country, like you said, that has your heart. It's your home. You grew up there. So how do you feel about what's happening over there? All the corruption, extortion, murder, kidnap.
Well, I have mixed feelings. First of all, I feel very blessed to be able to live here. Absolutely. And at the same time, very sad to see what's going on in Venezuela. It's not visible, really. What's really happening in Venezuela is not very visible, and you don't see it in the news as often as I think it should be. Partly because there are so many dramatic, things going on in the rest of the world, like what's happening now in Iraq and in Syria, but also because it's the other end of the ocean and Spanish speaking. But in reality, in Venezuela, I think what's going on in Venezuela matters to Europe, because Venezuela is now the corridor of drug trafficking from Bolivia and Peru to United States and Europe. So basically, is the way through the drug is shipped overseas. And also there are evidences that in Venezuela there are some terrorist cells like Hezbollah and ETA, the Spanish Basque. So there are some evidence that's happening in Venezuela. So a country that is run by it can become a country run by warlords or even drug lords. So I think that it should be more evident what's going on, and people should understand a little bit better what's happening, because it can become a problem for the rest of the West.
Do you still have family and friends out there in Venezuela?
I do, yeah.
And what do they say about the current situation?
They are desperate. Most of them would like to leave the country. Some of them are living. I mean, the diaspora, the Venezuelan diaspora, is around 1 million people. All over the world, really, and mostly people, young professionals, very competent, very capable. So there is a brain drain, quite dramatic. But it seems there are no options. There is no way out of what's going on. It's getting worse by the hour, I would say.
I know there's a real strength of community in Venezuela as well, and in fact the courage and the strength of, in fact, the Latin American women out there is second to none, is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not uncommon in Latin America to see women who are head of family. They are mothers and fathers, full-time workers. They take care of the old people, their parents. They are very resourceful, very strong, and in all walks of life. And therefore, you can see, currently we have 4 women presidents in Latin America. 4, yes. Laura Chinchilla in Costa Rica, Cristina Fernández in Argentina, Dilma Rousseff in Brazil, and Michelle Bachelet in Chile. And partly the reason is because the politics and politicians are so discredited, are so corrupted, and women are perceived as more honest and more decent. Therefore, they are perceived as more capable to lead these changes, the social and political changes that are currently going on in Latin America. And what I like about Latin American politicians, female politicians, is that they haven't lost their gender. They haven't become honorary men to lead their countries. They're still in touch with their soft side, and they're feminine and caring. And that's, I think, is quite unique in the world.
How difficult is it to make people care about the situation? Because that was your home. Venezuela is where your heart is.
Yeah.
You now live in Milton under Witchwood, but how do you make people care about the situation there, which sounds horrific?
At the beginning, I had these very ambitious targets that was to talk to 2 people every day about what was going on. That, of course, became unmanageable. But every time I have the opportunity to talk about what's happening in Venezuela, to current people, to taxi drivers or my colleagues at work, I do it. And of course, it's kind of a little bit like a very lonely task. There is not a very well articulated opposition movement in Venezuela. But I keep trying, and individually many people are trying to do a lot all over the world to raise awareness about what's going on.
Well, we're going to talk about your interesting career. We're going to talk about your acting as a teenager when, of course, you were in Venezuela. We'll also talk about your career as a biologist, and then, of course, your debut novel in English, which is called The Sense of Darkness. So we'll hear more about that. My guest in the studio is Cinzia de Santis. She lives in Milton under Witchwood, and she is now a full-time author. It's BBC Radio Oxford, and I'm joined in the studio by my guest this afternoon. She's called Cinzia de Santis. She was born and raised in Venezuela. Well, she wasn't born there. She went over to Venezuela when she was just a few months old as a baby. So that is her home. She's now living as a full-time author in Milton under Witchwood. But Cinzia, you haven't always been an author. So you mentioned your career as a biologist. That's sort of how it all started. Was your chosen career anything to do with the fact that you grew up, you were raised in one of the most beautiful countries in the world, and you wanted to protect that country?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. You're spot on, Kat, because to me, just to go to the sea and admire this diversity, the beauty, the colors, the smell, you really get to the point where you want to take care of it. And so for me, a way to take care of it was to study marine biology.
You mentioned the smell. What does Venezuela smell like?
It's very different. It's fruity, and it's warm and wonderful.
Oh, you've taken me there. You have.
Yeah.
How do you, a biologist that then goes into acting on the amateur and professional circuit. You've had quite a CV there, Cinzia.
Well, I really actually started my first, let's say, career, let's put it that way, although it wasn't a career, but I started acting when I was 11. I was very shy, and I thought that the way to, overcome my shyness was through acting, and I actually loved it. So I continued acting into my late 20s, and then I became a storyteller, and I wanted to write my own stories. So I started in that way. Books have always been in my family. My father was an avid book reader. My mother worked with a Nobel Prize winner, Gabriela Mistral. So I lived and I grew up in an environment of book lovers.
And did they read to you when you were a child, when you were a baby?
Yeah, yes.
What sort of stories did they read to you? Were they sort of Venezuelan classics?
No, they weren't Venezuelan classic. And actually there are beautiful Venezuelan stories, indigenous stories, origin myth stories. But no, it was more, type of Italian sort of stories. But also, the very, very warming stories as a child.
Cinzia, I would imagine that when you were living and growing up in Venezuela, you'd never even heard of a place called Oxfordshire, let alone know that one day you'd actually be living here in Milton under Witchwood.
Yes, you're right. Yes, sometimes I ask myself, how come? But the truth is that I was working for a Venezuelan company, then recruited by a British company in Venezuela. And 11 years ago, they offered me a job overseas. The situation was starting to degrade already, and I had a young daughter. So I said, well, I thought that it was better for her to be raised in a safe place like England. And then I was lucky enough to marry a very nice Brit who lives in Milton under Witchwood. And I retired from my career, and now I'm a full-time author.
Well, we'll talk about the book, The Sense of Darkness, in just a couple of moments' time. Of course, as I mentioned before, that is your debut novel in English. But first, we must do this.
Cat Orman on digital 95.2 FM and online.
BBC Radio Oxford.
Radio for Oxfordshire.
And my guest in the studio, you're hearing from Cinzia de Santis. She grew up in Venezuela. She now lives in Milton under Witchwood. What was that transition, Cinzia, actually a little bit unsettling? You said that you fell in love with a Brit, you married him, of course, and he just happened to live in Milton under Witchwood, but quite a different life, really, coming from Venezuela to Milton under Witchwood, albeit a very beautiful place.
Yes, indeed, it was. At the beginning, it was extremely difficult to settle down. Everything was different, the weather, the food, the smells, the landscape. And also I had the responsibility to raise my daughter. It was also particularly difficult because 3 weeks after I arrived to England, I discovered I had cancer, colon cancer, and probably with metastasis in the liver. So at that point in time, I said, well, I cannot live I cannot leave this world without saying the things that I want to say. And therefore, at that moment, is when I started to take really seriously writing again. So the first years were quite dark, let's put it that way. But then I found, as I say, this very nice Brit, and my life has completely turned around.
So you never thought, when you had that diagnosis of colon cancer, you never thought, well, actually, I'm going to go back to my friends, my family in Venezuela, and be there with them?
Well, apparently, if the diagnosis of the liver cancer was positive, I wouldn't have enough time to do it. So I said, well, I basically need to put my things, to.
How'd you come through that?
To
be faced with the end of your life, potentially.
Well, you have very strange reactions. My first reaction was to call. At the time, I was married to a Venezuelan who came here with me. And I called my best friends and I say, look, this is what's happening to me. You need to marry him because he's incapable of raising my daughter. So, these are the strange things that you think when you're faced with So I tried to put my things, straight. I didn't say anything to my family because I didn't want to upset them. And I really didn't know what to do. And then, I was I was determined to leave because my daughter was too young and I didn't want to leave her alone, and I have things to do. So it was very difficult, but now it's completely transformed, and I'm very, very lucky. And
you got over all that, and you're absolutely fine now.
Yeah, I'm fine. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's a very happy ending, isn't it?
Very
now
happy ending, yes.
You're writing full time now as well.
Yeah.
Does Milton Under Witchwood inspire your writing?
The memory of my country inspired my writing, but I definitely found a lot of peace and space to write in Milton Under Witchwood. Especially during the weekends, for me, it was the ideal time to write the novel. So it's a place that helped me a lot to undertake this career. This
right.
project.
Well, the English, your English debut, The Sense of Darkness, certainly your first novel in English, The Sense of Darkness. Can you just summarise that for us? What's it about? You mentioned Clara. I know that's the main character.
Yeah. The Sense of Darkness is a love story set in a beautiful but at the same time violent region in Latin America. The main characters are very powerful women whose lives are intertwined with the violence and also have to overcome their own personal circumstances. The heroine of the story is Clara. Clara is a blind girl. She's very vivacious. She's very resourceful. She is curious, a little bit mischievous, adventurous, and she is gifted with this incredible sense of smell that allows her to know where people and things are, so she can move around easily, and also she can smell the disease in people, in a person, and then in the exuberant forest that surrounds her, she can smell the cure. She finds natural remedy. So Clara becomes this very renowned healer. And people from the region come to see her, until one day a guerrilla gang bursts into her home with a badly wounded prisoner, and tell her she has to cure him, or if not, she will die. They will kill her. In the process of smelling this young man, she perceives a scent that she has never perceived before, and which provokes in her these feelings. Unknown, and this turmoil inside of her that she doesn't understand what's happening. As the young man gets better, he falls in love with this almost magical being, but the guerrilla will come back soon to take him. So this tension, Clara wanted to save him, and knowing that the guerrilla is coming back soon, it sets the scene for the next stages of the story.
Well, it sounds like a lovely love story. You mentioned Clara overcoming difficulties. You've overcome difficulties, and many of them. So were there elements of you within Clara?
In that sense, yes, and also the healing, the part of healing. The novel started it was very political at the beginning. It was my way to channel my sadness for what was going on in my country. But then the characters really take their own life, and it became softer and became nicer. And the disease had a lot to do with that. The healing process for me had a lot to do with the Clara's character. As I said before, Latin American women are very resourceful and very determined and brave. So Clara is the quintessence, I would say, of those characteristics.
Well, good luck with The Sense of Darkness, Cynthia. It's been a pleasure to meet you. It really has. And let's hope that indeed that's, of course, the debut English novel, but hopefully there'll be many more to follow as well. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Kat.